Today's video, we'll be looking at my K6-III Super Socket 7 build.
We review old technology from games to old PCs, and don't forget the toys. Get ancient electronics, we cover it all.
Alright guys, today we're going to be looking at this guy. This is a computer I'm very familiar with. This isn't something I just kind of have put together recently. I maybe put this computer together 6 or 7 years ago, and I use it pretty regularly. It's my Super Socket 7 machine. It's based around a K6-III Plus processor, which I believe is the fastest processor made for Super Socket 7 or Socket 7 in general. Came out in the year 2000. Kind of like my focus with this machine, I just kind of wanted... I liked Socket 7. Recently I started seeing... Well, there was a period not too long ago I was seeing so many Socket 7 boards, picking them up all over the place. I was actually getting sick of them. It seems like they've kind of dried up in the last couple years, so I'm actually sort of missing finding them all the time now. I wish I could come across them more often now. I used to be like, oh, another Socket 7 board. Now I wish I could I wish those days were back somewhat. I guess that's across the board for vintage computer stuff though. But yeah, I've used this thing pretty extensively. My goal with this build was kind of optimization. I wanted to see how far I could push Super Socket 7. I know people have made faster and more powerful machines, but I think I've done pretty well with this one. So I do have Windows 98 SE on here, but another kind of thing I wanted with this machine, I wanted to sort of have some really good kind of DOS compatibility. Cool thing with these K6 processors is you can go in the BIOS and disable various cache and things like that, and you can get these things down pretty low speeds for compatibility with a lot of DOS games. Now, that's not really my thing. If I want to play a game that requires, you know, like it runs best on like a 386 or a 46, I've got a lot of computers. I'll play it on a 386 or a 46, but these are good sort of jack of all trades builds, and this is what I've kind of made this based around. I kind of also went with what's the term in the computer, like a tweener. A lot of people call these type of computers, I think that means like an in-between computer, and this thing is good for like transferring files between newer and older stuff. So I can grab something off the internet on my Windows 10 machine, put it on a USB stick, put it in this thing, and then transfer it to like a 5 1/4 inch floppy or a 3 1/2 inch floppy or a zip disk or things like that. So it's good for moving things in between the most modern machines and then kind of some of the, not maybe the oldest, but the older machines. So those were kind of my three things for this machine. Just kind of optimize, try to make a powerful Super Socket 7, make sure I had some decent compatibility with MS-DOS, and then kind of make it as kind of a tweener system where I could transfer files or create disks for older systems. Alright, so now that we kind of know what this machine purpose basically is, I'm going to go over the exterior very briefly, and then we're going to open it up and take a look inside, and then of course we're going to benchmark and run some games on this guy. So first thing, this is an A-open case. I kind of like this case. I used to have 2 of these, and then one I painted black for my Splinter Cell build. Remember a couple of you guys were like, you destroyed the case. But I've got another one here, and I do like this case. It kind of flares up at the top a little bit, but it's not too much. It's a nice thick case, very solid, so I do like this case. So first thing is our CD. We have a CD compact disc drive here. I also have a DVD drive here. When I put this machine together, I was kind of going through an era where anything that was running Windows 98 or above, I threw 2 disk drives in, just because I had a pile of them. And I usually tried to go for like one was a CD drive and one was a DVD drive. You don't need to do that at all if you're building a machine like this, of this class. It was just, I was going through a phase. I went through a SCSI phase too, where I was just putting SCSI in everything. But my thinking at the time was, well, 1, I have all these optical drives laying around and I could at least put them to use. And 2, it was like division of labor. So If I had a game and it was on like compact disc, I'd run it in this drive. If I had a DVD game or a movie for some reason I want to watch on the computer, I would put it in this drive, and it kind of cut the wear and tear down on them. If I had one drive and everything was on it, I figured it would wear out quicker. That was kind of my thinking. Completely unnecessary. Speaking of unnecessary, this is a 1.2 megabyte 5.25 inch floppy drive. These really weren't in use in this era, late 90s, early 2000s. This was just kind of that tweener thing I was talking about. It gave me an ability, if I wanted, to make 1.2 megabyte floppy disks on this machine for older computers. I don't think I've ever done that with this machine. I suppose theoretically also I could use it to play like older games or look, you know, if I have an old disc and I wanted to see what's on it, I could do that with this drive. But really, I've never used this drive. So this, if you're building a machine of this era, you don't need this drive. But it is nice, I guess, if you do want like a secondary option of like creating disks for older machines. So again, standard 1.44 megabyte floppy drive, and then I throw a zip drive on, you know, everything. Very useful, these zip drives. Power button, reset button, power LED, hard drive activity LED. Two stickers here. I will show you these two cool stickers. This is, I believe that's an official AMD K6-III 3D Now processor case badge. Very cool. I really like that sticker. The second one here I got from Geekenspiel on eBay, and I guess this gives away what the video card I have in here is, but I have a bit to say about that, so we'll talk about that in a moment when I open this guy up. Alright, and here we are inside the case. Now again, this is all kind of pre-put together. I built this machine a long time ago. There is our K6-III Plus processor. Alright, so here is my K6-III Plus CPU. I removed it from the heatsink and motherboard, and mine is rated for, it is the 450 megahertz one. I do believe there is a 500, like an official 500 megahertz, and maybe even a 550 megahertz one, but I don't know about the 550 one. If it is real, it's pretty rare, and I think even the 500 ones are pretty rare, but they're kind of a little more sought after, because I guess the thought is you can overclock them a little bit better. I even think there's a lower voltage version. I think there's a 3, just a straight 3 volt version, or oh wait, 1.7. I think there might be a slightly lower voltage revision of this chip, but I'm not 100% sure. But anyways, this is pretty much just like a regular K6-III. It has 64 kilobytes of L1 cache. It's split up 32 plus 32. I believe 32 for data and 32 for instructions. And then it has the L2 cache, the whole 256 kilobytes of L2 cache. And then, of course, your memory on the motherboard. If you had L2 cache on the motherboard, that becomes L3 cache, and that's kind of the cool thing about this chip. But really, the Plus, there's a K6-II Plus as well as the K6-III Plus, but really the Plus, the difference is it's a smaller manufacturing process, so you get better results with overclocking out of this thing, which is the big why everyone loves these, because you can easily overclock these to 550 megahertz and even sometimes 600 megahertz. Other than that, it's not really that different. Again, this was really meant for the mobile market. This is really, it's a full-sized CPU to fit in the full-size desktop style socket, but it really was meant for the mobile market, hence the lower voltage. But again, not every Super Socket 7 motherboard is going to support it. You've got to have one that specifically supports it. A lot of times you'll need like a BIOS upgrade or update, so your motherboard will support this CPU. But again, not all of them do. Now, I do believe this does incorporate slightly, like a slightly better or enhanced version of 3D Now instructions. I think it's just called Enhanced 3D Now. But I actually don't know if any games or applications like really support that, or if it's backwards compatible with regular 3D Now. I don't know. I guess you guys can let us know in the comments if anything takes advantage of the enhanced 3D Now instructions that are in this CPU. The one big thing about them is they added 256K of L2 cache on the CPU, which had some pretty decent performance gains on socket 7. Now when you do this, the cool thing is the L2 cache on the motherboard becomes L3 cache, and then you have your standard memory there. So it adds like another level of fast memory, which is pretty cool. So these were pretty good performers. Like I said, these were Super Socket 7 CPUs. Unfortunately, on my board and setup, I haven't really been able to get it over 550 megahertz stable, but that's okay. It's quite a performer at that speed. Now, comparing the CPU, a lot of people want to compare this CPU to the Pentium line. So how fast is this CPU compared to the Pentium line? And there's a lot of variables there, including the socket and the motherboard. So at this time, Intel and the Pentium 2 and 3, they moved on to slot 1, and they were using completely different kind of motherboards. They weren't socket 7 CPUs. So I've read and I've seen a lot of benchmarks and comparisons between the K6-III Plus and the K6-III line and the Intel CPUs. So what I've been able to gather with all that information is it's probably... See, I've seen some things that, like, in business applications, just regular everyday use, it can actually rival... On the high end, I've seen like 450 megahertz Pentium 2 and 450 megahertz Pentium 3. Even I read one thing that even in like business applications and things, when it's well optimized, it can actually rival the 500 megahertz Pentium 3. I think that might be a little bit exaggerated, but I don't know. That it did specifically say business applications. When it talked about 3D gaming, unless it was a game that specifically supported 3D Now of this processor, they did say it wasn't equivalent to that quite fast of a Pentium. On the low end, I've seen these people say they're about equivalent to a 300 megahertz Pentium 2, 350-ish megahertz Pentium 2. I would maybe put it somewhere in the middle. Overall, if we're talking about just like everyday usage and games, I would maybe say roughly maybe a 400 megahertz Pentium 2. Maybe even a little bit lower, maybe even like 350 megahertz Pentium 2, if you like a average equivalent. But don't take my word for it. You can go on Vogons and stuff, look up. A lot of people have done like benchmarks and things like that. But I would estimate it to be around, maybe a faster Pentium 2. Again, depending. It's not going to do as well in games as a Pentium 2 or 3, obviously. But it's a cool CPU for Super Socket 7. When I do say Super Socket 7, I am referring to a Socket 7 board that is able to do 100 megahertz front side bus, as well as have an AGP slot, which we have right here. My motherboard here is a GA5AX revision 5.2. This is a pretty decent motherboard. This motherboard actually has 512K of L2 cache on the motherboard, which means when this CPU is installed, that becomes L3 cache. So then we have 256 of L2 cache, and then 512K of L3 cache. So, and then of course the RAM. So that's pretty good. So that's pretty cool. I have been tempted to take this CPU out and put it in my FIC board that actually has a whopping 2 megabytes of L2 cache. That would become 2 megabytes of L3 cache. I've considered doing that. I do believe that board does support the K6-III Plus. I just haven't done it. I have some sentimental attachment to the way that machine is currently configured. So I haven't done it. I don't know how much of a performance bump I'd get, but I've considered it. So let me know in the comments what you think I should do, but I don't know. I think I'm just going to leave it in this. I don't know if that huge bump of L3 cache would make that much of a difference. But yeah, this is a pretty decent board. Ali chipset. Like I said, obviously it does support the CPU, and it does support some light overclocking. Okay, so there is our memory right there. I have one stick of 256 megabytes of PC-133 memory. I've tried to grab the fastest PC-133 memory I could find. Now, this board is capable of more memory. And I believe this motherboard is capable of, I believe, 700 plus megabytes of memory, but you would think with me running Windows 98 I would at least put 512 megabytes in there, and I did for a while, but I was doing a lot of research on, I was trying to optimize this, and I was considering how much memory I actually needed and performance, and I seen a lot of things where just like a single stick of memory with this CPU actually performed better than two, and I didn't really need 512 megabytes for the purposes of what I've been using this machine for, so I kind of went with optimization, and I watched a lot of videos. Phil from Phil's Computer Lab did a couple videos with memory and how memory and affects speed with the K6-III. I don't know if his was on the K6-II or if he also used the K6-III in the memory, but anyways, I kind of discovered that maybe the best or most efficient or fastest configuration was just one single stick of this 258 megabytes. I don't really run anything on this machine that's going to require more memory than that, so that's why I went with that amount for this machine. Again, if you're doing this build yourself, feel free to put in 512. And then here's our internal bays. And right here is the hard drive. Off the top of my head, I cannot remember the size of it. I don't think it's too ridiculously large though, but I believe it's a Maxtor ATA133 drive. And I do have it connected here to a PCI controller. I'm not using the onboard controller. I believe this is, yeah. So this controller here, this is an ATA133. So realistically, using this PCI controller card, it's probably not really running any faster than if I use the onboard controller, but I don't know. Looked fun to do. So, and we also have a USB card right here. This is a 2.0 card. So built in, with this motherboard, we have, of course, your PS2 ports for mouse and keyboard. We do have two built-in USB ports right there. That I believe those are 2.0. Two serial and a parallel. Not too much on this, but I did want to add some more USB. So this card adds 3 more USB 2.0. Alright, so now let's move on to the video card and the sound card. I think maybe we'll talk about the sound card first, and then we'll talk about the video card, because I have a little bit to say about my choice there. Also, you might be wondering, what is this weird pastel thing? It looks like a leftover from the Eisenhower administration. I don't know. It's just a cooler fan, and it really has no reason to be in here except to be in here. It has these two fans that you can swivel around that are fairly ineffectual, and again, it has this weird, like, Easter blue, sky blue pastel color, and then it just connects into the PCI port. It's not powered or anything. It's all plastic, and then it has this. Wait, nope, that's, how the heck, oh, okay, here they are. It has these two, and then that goes to a Molex, so I don't know why it's in there, just because it's kind of ugly, and I didn't want it sitting on a shelf where I had to look at it. Got a lot of things, maybe if you noticed here, I had to do this, the fan right here, this frontal face, this front case fan, the power connector didn't fit, or wasn't long enough, so I used these little wires here and then connected them right down there. It's kind of a little extender thing. So here is the sound card I went with for this machine. I wanted to go with something different than your standard, Sound Blaster, like 16, or even one of the PCI Sound Blaster cards. I wanted to take advantage of the 16-bit ISA, because one of the focuses of this machine is being not just really proficient at running games, from the Windows 95 and 98 era, but I wanted to hit a really good compatibility with DOS as well. So I went with an ISA sound card, because it just gives way less troubles in DOS and just a lot more compatibility. But like I said, I wanted to go with something a little bit different, so I went with this card. It doesn't really have a name. I've got a number, an A151910. I believe this is a variation of like one of the Yamaha sound cards. So very good, very compatible. It looks pretty barren, not a lot of chips on it, but we do have a Yamaha OPL3 chip right here, so it does have real FM on it. And yeah, it's got, you know, some connectors for connecting to your CD-ROM there and there. Yeah, like it's a very kind of barren looking card, but I've had a pretty good experience with this card. It even has a spot, like a wavetable header here, although this does do MIDI, I believe via software MIDI, and I believe it's Yamaha's own, I forget what it's called, XGA or something like that. I forget exactly what it's called, but it does support software MIDI capabilities. But like I said, it does have that real OPL chip right there. Get a better look at it. So yeah, that's pretty cool. So this is a pretty good card, good compatibility with DOS and Windows as well. There's your joystick connector for a joystick, or I guess an external MIDI device. Mic port, line in, audio out. And then we have this interesting switch right here. It's 3D, so I guess that's for like a 3D audio effect. It's just interesting to actually have a actual switch on the sound card for on and off. I have it turned off. I haven't really noticed. I've had it on before. I didn't really notice anything, but maybe I really wasn't using the right software for it. I don't believe this card suffers from a hanging MIDI bug also, so if you wanted to use it with like an MT32, I don't think you'll have the hanging MIDI bug issues. Don't know 100% sure though, but I'm pretty sure it's free of that. So yeah, something a little bit different. I like these Yamaha cards. They tend to work really well, especially in DOS. So yeah, that was my pick for a sound card. Again, you're perfectly fine using a Sound Blaster 16, or, you know, if your focus is more Windows, I mean, even an AW32 and R64, those work great mostly in DOS. I've seen a couple games that will not work with the AW series for whatever reasons. But yeah, there's a lot of different sound card choices. You can even go with a PCI card, you know, like the Sound Blaster Live. Those have pretty good DOS compatibility. So don't feel constrained with the Socket 7 or Super Socket 7 build. This is just what I went with mine for my purposes. So let's look at video for this machine. Now, I have gone through a ton of video cards with this build. I'll put in a card and I'll use it for a while, and then I won't be really satisfied with it, and then I'll put in a different one. I've had a Voodoo Banshee in this machine. I've had a GeForce 256. I've had all kind of cards in here, and what I kind of settled with, at least for the past 2 or 3 years, is this card right here. And this is the TNT2 Ultra. So another cool thing about this is it is a open version of the card, and it's an open case, so I thought that was kind of cool. But why did I go with this card? Again, if you're using like Super Socket 7 and a K6-III, especially like a faster CPU like I am, I wanted a pretty powerful card that had, well, my priorities were good. It didn't have to be perfect, but good DOS compatibility, but I wanted something that would perform really well in Windows 95 or 98. So I like the TNT2. Now, the obvious choice for this kind of build would be this guy here, and that's the Voodoo 3. A very popular choice for this kind of machine, a Super Socket 7 machine. This is the Voodoo 3000. It is not the fancy Voodoo 3500. They're basically the same thing. The 3500 just is clocked higher, so this is a little bit slower clockwise, but basically it's the same thing. And Phil's Computer Lab did a excellent, comprehensive, series of videos actually on looking for the best graphics card in his opinion for a Super Socket 7 build. And actually he chose the Voodoo 3 3500. Again, you can't really go wrong with the Voodoo 3 3000 as well, but I don't know, I'm kind of finding it a little bit boring. It's weird to say about a 3DFX card, but I don't know, this is kind of like the de facto choice for this kind of machine. It has excellent DOS compatibility. It's AGP, but I don't believe it uses any of the features of AGP, so you won't run into any weird issues there. It's fast. The 3500, I believe, is like faster than the TNT2 Ultra. It supports Glide, So a lot of games that really supported the Glide API format of the time. But I didn't go with this card. I went with, as we've seen before, the TNT2 Ultra. It's almost just as fast. In some cases, it's even faster. So it doesn't have. So the Voodoo 3500 does have a slight speed edge. I wasn't really worried about Glide compatibility because I already have several computer builds that have Voodoo cards in them. I have a couple with a Voodoo 1 card, I have a Voodoo 2 build, I have a Voodoo 5500 build. I didn't really see the need to have a Voodoo 3 for Glide in this machine. This card, the TNT2 Ultra, the TNT2 line does do some things a little bit better than the Voodoo as well. I believe like the textures in certain circumstances do look a little bit sharper, a little bit better on the TNT2. It also does 32-bit color, whereas the Voodoo cards only do, well, 16 color, but it does something fancy where they called it, I believe they called it 24-bit color. So a lot of games didn't support it at the time. If you're playing like late 90s stuff, it's not really an issue. Most people would even notice. But there are some advantages to the TNT2 line, so that's kind of why I went with this TNT2 Ultra card. Though recently, I've kind of run into an issue where, if you've watched some of my older videos, I did finally find a TNT2 Ultra card to put into my IBM PL machine. So I'm rocking a TNT2 Ultra in that machine, which is running a Pentium 3. So I don't like to have multiple machines that have like the same video card. I like to mix things up, so I have like a real variety of machines with different specs and different kind of cards. So even though this card has served me very well, and I would say this is one of the top pick cards to pick if you're going for a Super Socket 7 build, or a build with a K6-III Plus in it. This is an excellent card to use. The TNT2 and the TNT2 Ultra especially, great pick. Maybe second only to the 3500. Again, this is only a 3000. And depending on your needs, this may be your best pick. So, but yeah, I don't think I'm going to use this card anymore just because I already have a machine with a TNT2 Ultra in it. So I think in this video, I'll be doing a couple benchmarks and we'll be seeing the difference here. So I am going to install this guy for our benchmarks, because there's quite a few videos that pit the Voodoo 3500 against the TNT2 Ultra. But I didn't really see much with just like your bog standard Voodoo 3000. So I want to see what kind of difference it makes with this being clocked a little bit lower than the 3500. Maybe speed-wise it makes it a lot more even with the Ultra speed-wise in games. So I'm curious about that. But like I said, I find this card a little bit boring, and I don't really need another Glide machine. So I don't think this does anything that my 5500 doesn't. I don't think this is any more compatible with certain games or not. But we're going to bench it just in case. I would also like to point out real quick that, yeah, I did remove the heatsink. I replaced it with this one from Vantech. When I originally got this card, the heatsink fan just wasn't working, so I have upgraded it with this nice copper looking heatsink fan. Although I do have to connect it to a different, I can't like connect it to the board itself. But yeah, this has worked really nice for me. Alright, I'm just starting off here with the posting here of this machine. Again, we're overclocked to 550 megahertz. I'm sure I mentioned it earlier, but you can overclock these K6-III Pluses as a matter of routine. Usually 550 is easy. At anything above that, it's luck of the draw depending on your chip and whatnot. So right here, I just want to show you real fast. Going into, there's the program, the drivers for the sound card. As you see, yeah, there's the, what is it, XG. It does general MIDI, and then I believe that's Yamaha's version of it. You can set the quality. I've just set it to good. You have reverb, a bunch of different sound options there. And then here is Sandra 99, just to take a quick, overview of the system here. So yeah, there's some information there for any of you that are interested. Performance rating, that's interesting. PR 552. So is that saying it's equating it to a 552 megahertz Pentium? Is that a regular Pentium or like a Pentium 2 or a Pentium 3? I don't know. Not very clear, but PR rating. Yeah, just going through some of the different things there. Right now, by the way, I still have the TNT2 Ultra in there. So I believe all of the the game footage you'll be seeing, because I ran some games, I believe all of that is with the TNT2 Ultra. So keep that in mind. All right, so moving on here. And here's an interesting thing to note. When I try to run CPU-Z on this machine, it actually crashes. Now, other than this machine is pretty much rock stable. I haven't really had any issues or crashes, but except for CPU-Z is the only program that comes to mind that just crashes every time I try to run it. And then I also wanted to show you guys this little AGP Control Center program I found for use with the Ali chipset. You can see here enabled AGP. You can put it in turbo mode, which mine is in. You can make sure the AGP rate is set to ×2. So it's just a neat little program to double check your settings for your AGP card and your AGP bus. Alright, so let's take a look at some bar graphs real quick with my benchmarks here. Now, I didn't go too far into this because this video is really more about the K6-III Plus PC as a whole, and it's not really about the video cards in it. Many video cards will work fine in this machine, so this is just a quick look. I only did 3 benchmarks here: 3D Mark 99, 2000, and 2001 SE. And all these benchmarks, the Voodoo 2 Ultra did win, not by too much, but by a little bit, except for 3D Mark 2001 SE. And the one thing to note there, I used the default benchmark. I just loaded the program, hit default benchmark. With 3D Mark 2001 SE, though, when I did run it for the TNT2, I did run it in 32 color mode. And I don't know, I wasn't thinking at the time. I should have set it to 16 color mode to be on even ground. But the Voodoo 3 is running in the 16 color mode, obviously, because it can't run in 32-bit color mode. So that might be why the Voodoo 3 is winning in that particular benchmark. So let's take a quick look at a couple games now. And then again, just taking a look at 4 games: Quake 2, Quake 3, AMD K2, and Expendable. Running those games built-in benchmarks. Kind of the opposite. We have the Voodoo 3 3000 winning in all of these. Sometimes looks like Quake 3, it's just a little bit. MDK2 and Quake 2, it's not significant, but it's a noticeable amount. Again, maybe Quake 2 and Quake 3 do favor the Voodoo 3. Expendable, I got 30 FPS on both of those, but that's probably because I forgot to turn off the no vertical sync or whatever, so it's probably hitting a cap on those two. Alright, so with those benchmark bar graphs out of the way, let's just take a quick look at a couple games I played on this machine. Now, all this footage is taken from the TNT2 Ultra being installed, and that's just because that's the card I preferred over the Voodoo 3, and that is the card I used for years in this machine, until I ended up putting a Voodoo or a TNT2 Ultra in a different machine. So let's take a look at this machine in action with the TNT2 Ultra, and of course our K6-III Plus running at 550 megahertz.
Teams are tied. Red leads.
Sector C test labs and control facilities. If your intended destination is a high security area beyond Sector C, you will need to return to the Central Transit Hub in Area 9 and board a high security train. If you have not yet submitted your identity to the retinal clearance system, you must report to Black Mesa personnel for processing before you will be permitted into the high security branch of the transit system.
And that was a look at my K6-III Plus build, a great CPU for Super Socket 7 if your motherboard supports it. It's a good overclocker, it's a good underclocker, it's a good Super Socket 7 CPU, and it's got this kind of cool factor that comes along with it. Now, a graphics card, I will be removing that sticker since I don't want two PCs with a TNT2 Ultra in them. Just seems a little redundant. I want to put something a little different in that, so I'm still kind of making up my mind. So yeah, hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any more suggestions for this machine, it might be, I might be seeing it putting in another board. Like I said, one of these days I might replace the motherboard with a PA 2013 with a 2 megabytes of L2 cache. I just want to see what difference that makes, if any. So I don't know. I know that board supports the K6-III Plus, so I don't know. We'll see. If I do anything drastic with this build in the future, I will let you guys know. But K6-III and the K6-III Plus, cool CPUs. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Hope you enjoyed learning about my build here, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you guys for watching.